In the shadowed depths of human pain, where trust is lost and hearts are slain, we seek the why, the where, the how, to mend the wounds, to heal somehow. But is the truth we hold so dear a fractured lens, unclear, insincere? Have you ever wondered if the way we understand betrayal and forgiveness might be flawed? What if the stories we tell ourselves about pain, trust, and healing are only half the truth? Today, we'll embark on a journey to challenge one of the most popular perspectives on betrayal, a perspective rooted in Zen and Buddhist teachings. It claims all harm stems from ignorance, greed, or hatred. But is that the whole story? Or are we missing something vital? Many of you might have watched a video that attributes all harm to three causes: ignorance, greed, and hatred. While this perspective is undoubtedly insightful, could it be oversimplified? Could it fail to account for the complexities of human behavior, the nuances of cultural context, or the unique circumstances of individual lives? Today, we'll challenge these ideas, not to dismiss them, but to deepen our understanding. We'll reflect on questions like, does every act of harm really stem from suffering? Is forgiveness always the key to freedom? Or could it sometimes perpetuate cycles of harm? And most importantly, how can we apply these teachings in a way that truly liberates us? As we begin, I invite you to keep an open mind. Together, let's step beyond traditional narratives and embrace a broader view of betrayal, forgiveness, and healing. Let's dive deeper into the heart of the argument, the idea that all harm stems from three causes: ignorance, greed, and hatred. On the surface, this framework seems simple, elegant even. It provides a structured way to understand the complexities of human behavior. But does it truly encompass the full spectrum of why people hurt each other? Let's break it down. Ignorance, a mist that blinds, or an excuse. The first cause, ignorance, is described as a fog that clouds judgment and blinds people to the interconnectedness of life. It suggests that those who harm others often do so out of confusion or lack of understanding. But here's the question: does ignorance absolve responsibility? Shouldn't awareness and accountability go hand in hand? For instance, consider someone who knowingly betrays a friend for personal gain. Is that truly ignorance? Or is it a calculated choice, made with full awareness of the consequences? Ignorance as an explanation may offer compassion, but it risks excusing deliberate harm. Greed, the insatiable hunger or a deeper void. The second cause, greed, paints harm as a byproduct of unfulfilled desires, a relentless pursuit of wealth, power, or recognition. While greed certainly plays a role in many conflicts, is it always the root cause? What about harm driven by ideology, loyalty, or even love? Sometimes, people harm others not out of a desire for gain, but out of a misguided sense of duty or passion. By focusing solely on greed, we might overlook other motivations that are equally, if not more, significant in understanding human actions. Hatred, a consuming flame, or a symptom of something deeper. The third cause, hatred, is likened to a fire that consumes both the victim and the perpetrator. It's a compelling metaphor, but does it capture the complexity of emotions like jealousy, resentment, or even righteous anger? Hatred often arises from deeper wounds, fear, humiliation, or a sense of injustice. By labeling it as a primary cause, we risk oversimplifying its origins and missing the opportunity to address the underlying pain that fuels it. The danger of oversimplification. The framework of ignorance, greed, and hatred offers clarity, but clarity isn't always truth. Human behavior is rarely so neatly categorized. Sometimes, harm is the result of systemic issues, cultural, political, or social forces that shape individual actions. Other times, it's driven by a mix of personal experiences and external pressures. By attributing all harm to these three causes, we risk reducing complex realities into overly simplistic explanations. The missing piece: where is accountability? Another critical question arises: where is the role of personal accountability in this framework? If we view harm solely as a product of ignorance, greed, and hatred, do we unintentionally absolve people of their choices? While compassion and understanding are vital, they must coexist with accountability. Without it, how can we foster genuine growth and transformation? Is forgiveness always the path to freedom? The video suggests that forgiveness is the ultimate path to inner peace and freedom. It encourages us to let go of anger and see harm through the lens of understanding. While this perspective is deeply rooted in Buddhist teachings, it raises a fundamental question: is forgiveness always the right choice? For some, forgiveness can feel empowering, but for others, it might feel like a dismissal of their pain, especially when the harm done is severe or ongoing. Take the case of systemic abuse or betrayal by someone who continues to inflict harm. In these situations, forgiving too quickly or too easily can lead to enabling destructive behaviors, rather than resolving them. Perhaps forgiveness is not a universal solution, but rather one tool among many in the journey to healing. Sometimes, accountability, boundaries, or even righteous anger may serve a person's healing process better than forgiveness alone. The question of cultural context. Another consideration is the cultural lens through which these teachings are viewed. Concepts like ignorance, greed, hatred, and forgiveness are interpreted differently across cultures. In some societies, forgiveness is seen as a sign of strength, while in others, it might be perceived as weakness or submission. Are we imposing a universal framework on deeply personal and culturally specific experiences? And if so, does that framework risk alienating those who do not see forgiveness as the ultimate goal? Does every act of harm stem from suffering? The idea that all harm stems from suffering is both profound and controversial. While it's true that pain often begets pain, not all acts of harm are born from a place of inner turmoil. Some individuals harm others out of malice, entitlement, or a sense of superiority. In these cases, is it fair or even accurate to say that their actions are rooted in suffering? Could it be that framing all harm as a reflection of suffering risks minimizing the agency and intent behind harmful acts? The role of power and privilege. A critical aspect missing from this framework is the role of power and privilege. Sometimes harm is inflicted not out of ignorance, greed, or hatred, but out of a systemic imbalance of power. For example, acts of exploitation or oppression often stem from a sense of entitlement, or systemic structures that perpetuate inequality. To reduce these actions to personal flaws like ignorance or greed might oversimplify the broader dynamics at play. A broader perspective, moving beyond simplistic explanations. As we reflect on these points, it's clear that while the framework of ignorance, greed, and hatred offers valuable insights, it's not without its limitations. To fully understand the causes of harm, we must consider the interplay of personal, cultural, and systemic factors. Human behavior is complex, and our understanding of it should reflect that complexity. When we look at the idea that all harm stems from ignorance, greed, and hatred, it's clear that this perspective offers a starting point, but it's not the full picture. Human behavior is rarely driven by singular motivations. Instead, it's shaped by a complex web of personal choices, cultural influences, and even systemic forces. To truly understand why people harm one another, we need to expand the lens through which we view these actions. Karma, for instance, plays a critical role in Buddhist philosophy, reminding us that every action has consequences. But while karma explains the ripples of our deeds, it doesn't excuse intentional harm. What about those who choose to hurt others despite understanding the consequences? Is their behavior a result of suffering, or could it be a willful rejection of empathy, driven by ego or entitlement? This is where the conversation about personal responsibility becomes essential. A broader perspective would place equal emphasis on individual accountability, alongside compassion. Moreover, emotions like anger, greed, and hatred are rarely as straightforward as they appear. Anger might stem from a deep sense of injustice, rather than pure malice. Greed could be intertwined with fear or a survival instinct, By framing these emotions as singular causes, we risk oversimplifying the nuanced realities of human experience. Life isn't black and white, and neither are the motivations behind our actions. We must also consider the broader context in which harm occurs. Systemic structures and collective karma play a significant role in shaping our experiences. Acts of harm often arise not only from individual flaws, but also from societal pressures or entrenched inequalities. For instance, exploitation and oppression are rarely the result of one person's ignorance or greed. They are often perpetuated by systems that benefit those in power. To address harm, we need to look beyond individuals and examine the structures that enable such actions. Forgiveness is another concept that, while powerful, may not always be the best or first step toward healing. Sometimes, forgiveness can feel like dismissing one's pain, especially in cases of ongoing harm. Healing isn't a one-size-fits-all process. For some, setting boundaries, seeking justice, or even channeling anger into constructive action may be more empowering than forgiveness. Compassion and accountability can coexist, creating a space where healing is both personal and transformative. Finally, embracing the full complexity of human nature allows us to see beyond labels like victim or perpetrator. Each of us carries both light and shadow, capable of acts of kindness and harm. A more holistic understanding of human behavior recognizes this duality and uses it to foster growth, not division. By acknowledging these complexities, we can begin to address the root causes of harm in a way that's both compassionate and practical. The illusion of simplicity, why we crave easy answers. As humans, we are wired to seek order in chaos. When life throws us into the turbulent waters of betrayal or harm, we instinctively reach for explanations that simplify the complexities of human behavior. Frameworks like ignorance, greed, and hatred offer us a sense of clarity and control. They provide a tidy narrative that helps us make sense of our pain. They hurt me because they were ignorant, or their greed blinded them. These explanations feel satisfying, but are they truly accurate? Simplicity is seductive. It gives us a lens through which we can view the world, without being overwhelmed by its intricacies. But what happens when that simplicity glosses over deeper truths? Consider the idea of ignorance as a cause of harm. Ignorance implies a lack of understanding, a blindness to the consequences of one's actions. But does this explanation hold up in every situation? What about the person who knows they are causing harm yet proceeds anyway? Are they truly ignorant? Or are they making a conscious choice to prioritize their desires over the well-being of others? This oversimplification can be dangerous. By attributing harm solely to ignorance, greed, or hatred, we risk absolving individuals of their agency. We might say, they didn't know better, when in reality, they did. This kind of thinking can prevent us from holding people accountable for their actions, and in doing so, it can perpetuate cycles of harm. Furthermore, reducing complex emotions to singular causes can hinder our ability to truly understand the dynamics at play. Greed, for instance, is often described as an insatiable hunger for more, a desire that drives people to harm others in their pursuit of wealth, status, or power. But is greed always the root cause? What about fear, insecurity, or even desperation? In many cases, greed is not a standalone motivator, but a symptom of deeper emotional or psychological struggles. To reduce it to a single concept is to ignore the underlying pain that fuels it. Hatred, too, is rarely as straightforward as it seems. The original video describes it as a consuming flame, but hatred often arises from a complex interplay of emotions: jealousy, resentment, humiliation, and fear. By labeling it as a primary cause, we risk overlooking the circumstances that ignite it. For example, someone might lash out in anger, not because they are consumed by hatred, but because they feel powerless or unheard. Recognizing these nuances allows us to address the root causes of harm more effectively. Another limitation of simplistic frameworks is their tendency to focus on individual flaws. While ignoring systemic influences, harm is not always the result of personal failings. It can also stem from societal structures that perpetuate inequality and injustice. Consider acts of oppression or exploitation. These are not merely the actions of ignorant or greedy individuals. They are often rooted in systems of power and privilege that enable and encourage such behavior. To attribute these acts solely to personal shortcomings is to overlook the broader context in which they occur. Ultimately, the illusion of simplicity can be comforting, but it is not without consequences. By clinging to oversimplified explanations, we limit our ability to see the full picture. Life is messy, unpredictable, and filled with gray areas. To navigate it effectively, we must be willing to embrace complexity. This means asking harder questions, sitting with uncomfortable truths, and challenging the narratives we've been taught to accept. So, how do we move beyond simplicity? It starts with a willingness to look deeper, to explore not just the actions of others, but also the systems, emotions, and motivations that drive them. By doing so, we open the door to a more nuanced understanding of human behavior, one that acknowledges the complexity of our shared humanity. The power of boundaries, redefining compassion. Compassion is a cornerstone of Buddhist teachings, a guiding principle that encourages us to approach others with kindness and understanding, even in the face of harm. It teaches us to see the suffering behind the actions of those who hurt us and respond not with anger, but with empathy. This is a powerful and transformative idea, but like all concepts, it has its limitations. What happens when compassion is misunderstood? What happens when it leads us to tolerate harm rather than address it? Many people equate compassion with forgiveness, assuming that to truly let go of anger, we must absolve those who hurt us. While forgiveness can be liberating, it is not the only expression of compassion. In fact, sometimes the most compassionate thing we can do, for ourselves and for others, is to set firm boundaries. Boundaries are not walls to shut people out. They are lines that protect our well-being, while still allowing for connection and understanding. They send a clear message. I value my peace and safety, and I will not allow harm to continue unchecked. This redefinition of compassion challenges the traditional narrative that forgiveness is the ultimate goal. Consider this scenario. A friend repeatedly lies to you, breaking your trust time and again. Traditional teachings might encourage you to forgive, to look beyond their actions and see their suffering. But is that truly compassionate? Or does it enable a cycle of behavior that harms both of you? Compassion, in this case, might mean stepping back, setting a boundary, and allowing the friend to face the consequences of their actions. Boundaries are not a rejection of compassion. They are an extension of it. They recognize the humanity in others, while also honoring our own needs. This balance is crucial because without it, compassion can become distorted. It can lead us to excuse harmful behavior or sacrifice our own well-being in the name of understanding. True compassion must be rooted in a deep respect for both self and others, creating a space where growth and healing are possible. Setting boundaries is not always easy. It requires courage to say no, to walk away, or to demand better treatment. It can feel uncomfortable, especially if you've been taught to equate compassion with self-sacrifice. But boundaries are a vital part of healing. They create the conditions for trust to be rebuilt, for accountability to take place, and for relationships to transform. Without boundaries, forgiveness risks becoming hollow, a gesture that addresses the surface, while ignoring the root causes of harm. Compassion also extends to how we view ourselves in the aftermath of harm. Too often, people internalize the actions of others, believing they must have done something to deserve the pain they've experienced. This self-blame is not only harmful, but also deeply untrue. Compassion for oneself involves rejecting this narrative and recognizing that you are not responsible for the choices of others. It means treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you strive to offer others. Ultimately, compassion is not about enduring harm or excusing it. It's about creating a space where healing can occur, for yourself and for those who have hurt you. It's about recognizing that true compassion is not passive. It's active, deliberate, and often requires difficult decisions. By redefining compassion to include boundaries, we empower ourselves to move beyond pain and toward genuine growth and connection. The role of self-reflection, turning pain into growth. Pain, especially the pain of betrayal, has a way of consuming our thoughts. It pulls us into an endless loop of why. Why did this happen? Why did they do this? Why me? These questions often direct our focus outward, placing the spotlight on the person who hurt us. But what if the key to healing lies not in understanding them, but in understanding ourselves? Self-reflection is one of the most powerful tools we have for transforming pain into growth. It doesn't mean blaming ourselves for the actions of others. Rather, it's about looking inward to examine how the experience has shaped us. What did it reveal about our boundaries? About our values? About the ways we navigate trust and vulnerability? In many ways, self-reflection turns pain into a mirror, an opportunity to see ourselves more clearly and with greater compassion. This process can be uncomfortable. It requires us to confront parts of ourselves that we may have ignored or avoided. Perhaps we stayed in a harmful relationship because we feared loneliness. Perhaps we allowed someone to cross a boundary because we didn't know how to assert ourselves. These realizations can be painful, but they are also liberating. They give us the tools to grow, to strengthen our sense of self, and to create healthier patterns moving forward. Self-reflection also helps us reframe the narrative of pain. Instead of seeing ourselves solely as victims, we can begin to see ourselves as active participants in our healing journey. We shift the focus from what was done to me to how can I grow from this? This doesn't mean excusing harm or downplaying its impact. It means reclaiming our power, turning even the most painful experiences into opportunities for transformation. Moreover, self-reflection fosters empathy, not just for ourselves, but for others. When we examine our own flaws and struggles, we begin to see them reflected in those who hurt us. This doesn't excuse their actions, but it does help us understand the humanity behind them. It reminds us that, like us, they are navigating their own challenges, insecurities, and pain. However, self-reflection isn't a one-time process. It's a practice, something we return to again and again. As we continue to grow, each time we reflect, we peel back another layer, uncovering deeper truths about ourselves and the world around us. It's a journey, not a destination, and it's one that transforms pain from a source of suffering into a catalyst for change. Ultimately, self-reflection is about empowerment. It's about taking ownership of our healing and choosing to grow despite the pain we've endured. It's about recognizing that while we can't control the actions of others, we can control how we respond to them. And in that response lies our greatest strength. The ripple effect of pain and healing. Pain, like a stone thrown into still water, creates ripples that extend far beyond the initial impact. When someone harms us, the effects are rarely confined to just the two people involved. The hurt spreads, affecting friendships, families, and even communities. It influences how we perceive the world, how we interact with others, and how we carry ourselves in future relationships. For instance, consider a person betrayed by a close friend. The immediate pain of betrayal might lead them to withdraw from other relationships, doubting the trustworthiness of those around them. Over time, this mistrust can create barriers, isolating them and preventing genuine connections. The ripples of that initial harm don't just affect the person betrayed. They affect everyone who tries to get close to them. But here's the transformative truth. Healing also creates ripples. When we choose to confront our pain and work through it, the effects radiate outward in ways we might not immediately see. By breaking the cycle of anger and mistrust, we open the door for deeper connections and healthier relationships. Our healing inspires those around us, showing them that growth is possible even in the face of great pain. This ripple effect of healing is particularly powerful when we consider the role of forgiveness. While forgiveness is a deeply personal journey, its impact often extends far beyond the individual. Forgiving someone doesn't just free us from the weight of resentment. It also changes the dynamic between us and the person who harmed us. It creates the possibility for reconciliation, even if that reconciliation is never fully realized. Moreover, healing doesn't have to mean forgiveness. For some, healing might involve setting boundaries, seeking justice, or finding closure in other ways. These actions, too, send ripples into the world. They show others that it's possible to stand up for oneself, while still maintaining compassion and integrity. They demonstrate that pain doesn't have to define us. It can be a stepping stone to something greater. The interconnectedness of human relationships means that every action we take, whether in pain or in healing, affects those around us. This is why self-reflection and intentionality are so important. By understanding the ripples of our own actions, we can choose to create waves of positivity and growth, rather than perpetuating cycles of harm. As we reflect on the ripple effect of pain and healing, one thing becomes clear: we have more power than we often realize. While we can't control the stones that others throw into our lives, we can control how we respond. And in that response lies the potential to transform not only ourselves, but also the world around us. Conclusion: choosing the path of liberation. As we bring this journey to a close, let's take a moment to reflect on everything we've explored. Pain, betrayal, and forgiveness are some of the most challenging experiences we face as human beings. They test our resilience, push us to confront our deepest fears, and often force us to question the narratives we've built around trust and healing. But within these struggles lies an opportunity, a chance to grow, to transform, and to redefine what freedom truly means. We began by examining the framework of ignorance, greed, and hatred as the root causes of harm. While this perspective offers valuable insights, we've also seen its limitations. Human behavior is far too complex to be neatly categorized. By embracing this complexity, we open ourselves to a deeper understanding of why people act the way they do, and how we can respond in ways that foster growth, not just for ourselves, but for those around us. We've discussed the importance of boundaries as an expression of compassion, the transformative power of self-reflection, and the ripple effects of both pain and healing. These concepts remind us that healing is not a linear process, nor is it one-size-fits-all. It's a deeply personal journey that requires courage, patience, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths. At the heart of this conversation is a simple but profound truth. We may not always have control over what happens to us, but we always have control over how we respond, whether through forgiveness, accountability, or a combination of both. We have the power to shape our own healing, and in doing so, we not only liberate ourselves, but also create a ripple effect that touches the lives of others. So, as you move forward from this video, I invite you to reflect on your own journey. What pain are you still carrying? And how can you begin to release it? What boundaries do you need to set to protect your peace? And most importantly, how can you use your own experiences, both the pain and the healing, to bring greater understanding and compassion into the world? The path to liberation is not easy, but it is always worth walking. Each step we take toward understanding, toward compassion, and toward healing brings us closer to the freedom we seek. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Until next time, take care, and remember, the power to heal is within you.